father began to weep because he knew exactly why this man was there. And they embraced, and he invited him into the house, and he sat with the mother and the father and the sister of the young man who had fallen. And he began the speech that he had rehearsed in his head so many times, but the father stopped him and said, "You needn't make that speech. We know why you're here, and we know why he died, because we know what he lived for. He lived for a dream. And to die, to live, to sacrifice yourself on behalf of a dream is actually a great zchut. It's a great honor. And we feel that, even as we feel the intense pain of his loss." General Halevi looked at all of us, the thousands of us gathered in the Kotel Plaza, and he said, "I have never forgotten that moment. Not in all the years that I have sent women and men into battle, not in all of the times I have had to visit families, not in all of the moments when I had to make terribly difficult strategic decisions, I have never forgotten the kindness of that family, the commitment, the idealism, the intense pain of loss. There isn't a family in Israel that hasn't lost someone. Not one. And so on Yom Hazikaron in Israel, everyone goes to the cemetery. Whether it's to the national cemetery on the top of Mount Herzl, or whether it's to the local cemetery at the corner of a kibbutz, everyone goes to the cemetery. And they recite the names out loud, one at a time. Because it's not some large number in the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands. It's only one. Somebody's son, somebody's daughter, a brother, a sister, a lover, a friend, a parent, a grandparent, a classmate, a buddy. It's one and one and one and one. And each one is of infinite preciousness. Each one is cherished. Each one is honored. Each one is mourned. Yom HaZikaron may be the saddest day in the Israel calendar, and in some ways it is the most inspiring and the most powerful and the most remarkable. And at the end of the day comes a siren, as we'll do in a few moments, and the day turns from mourning into dancing and from sadness into song. Lu Yehi, let the day come when the last one will be buried and the new generation will never again have to know war.
Please join me on the part you know.
עוד יש מפרש לבן באופק מול ענן שחור כבד כל שנבקש לו יהי ויהי בחלונות הערב או נרות החג רועד כל שנבקש לו יהי שנבקש לו יהי
Each and every year, VBS Day School welcomes a shinshin from the Jewish Agency. A shinshin is an Israeli high school graduate who defers their mandatory IDF military service for a year of service. Shnat Sherut, Shin, Shnat Sherut, to act as a cultural emissary for the Jewish Agency for Israel. Each year, our day school finds a way to welcome amazing Israelis into our community to fill this role. But this year, we have a really extraordinary shinshin in Rotem Dagani. On this Yom Hazikaron, it is my honor to welcome to this bima our current shinshin Rotem to discuss his very personal connection to a friend and a fallen soldier. Welcome, Rotem.
Shalom, everyone. My name is Rotem Dgani, and I am more than lucky to be the shinshin at VBS Day School. As you may have seen in the hallway, I created a small museum to honor the fallen soldiers from my high school, Tzafit. It was truly an honor for me to learn more deeply about them, their lives, their values, and their individual stories. I gained so much through this process, and it was truly an incredibly meaningful experience. Back in Israel, I live in a small kibbutz called Kibbutz Chatzor. It is a close-knit community of around 900 people. It's not very big, but it has a strong sense of unity and belonging. It really feels like one big family, so you don't really have a choice. You just know everybody. Oz was one of those people you couldn't miss. Whether you saw him on the trail or out on the field, he was always there. He always had that smile, that look that said that everything is going to be okay. It was a calm, positive energy that was truly contagious. Oz was the son of Yael and Idan Aradi, and the brother of Paz, Yara, and Agam. And he was an amazing friend for all those who knew him. Growing up, Oz had one of the biggest smiles out of all the kids in the kibbutz. From a young age, he became a mechanic. He could fix anything: cars, bikes, motorcycles, you name it. Over time, he fell in love with agriculture, working in the fields, staying out late nights, and waking up early in the morning. He loved driving tractors, listening to music, and simply being out there, connected to the land. It wasn't just something that he did. It was who he was. In Hebrew, there's a term for someone who truly embodies what Israel is all about. Someone with strong values, a deep love for the land, and who sets for an example for others. We call that person Melach Haaretz, the salt of the earth. That is exactly who Oz was. Oz joined the army and served in the Combat Engineering Corps. His friends from the unit describe him as a true friend, someone reliable, someone who lifted everyone's spirit. During his service, he became a medic for his team, which reflects the deep care he had for others. On December 14th, 2023, Oz and his team were traveling in a military vehicle in Gaza when a suicide attacker approached and attached an explosive device to their vehicle. Oz was killed instantly. Oz's impact on everyone at the kibbutz still remains and will continue to guide us. His way of looking at life, his kindness, and his constant positive energy will stay with us forever. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Please rise and join me in a moment of silence, accompanied by a siren, as it was observed in Israel this morning.
עצי מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים וגיבורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים לנשמות הקדושים שנלחמו בכל מערכות ישראל במחתרת ובצבא ההגנה לישראל ושנפלו במלחמתם ומסרו נפשם על קדושת השם העם והארץ בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם אדוני נחלתם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ותעמוד לכל ישראל זכותם ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימים ולומר אמן. You may be seated.
This past January, we were fortunate enough to join members of VBS, guided by our fearless leader, Rabbi Nolan Leibovitz, on a mission of solidarity to Israel. In reflection, Karen and I honestly say that we traveled not only as tourists, but as a family, fellow Jews, brothers and sisters, with a common bond and focus of Tikkun Olam. Many of our friends and family couldn't understand why we were traveling to Israel at this time of such great uncertainty. In a world that too often has turned its back on Israel, our purpose was to turn towards our brothers and sisters with open arms and full hearts. We came to show our support for a nation under strain, to stand by families and the youth who shoulder burdens far beyond their years, and to remind ourselves that to love a people is to share in both its joy and its sorrows. We arrived at Har Herzl with hearts heavy and hopeful, carrying the fragile, fierce weight of memory. It was relatively eerie as we made our way up the path of this sacred land. The wind and the rain enveloped us like an invisible community of witnesses as we walked among the rows that hold the stories of this nation. Here, where the soil itself is considered consecrated by sacrifice and vision, we made our way to the grave of Michael Levin. Michael was not born in Israel. He first came to Israel on birthright trip, of which our amazing guide and now friend Itzik enlightened Michael as his madrik. And what began as a discovery became destiny. After the experience, Michael chose to make Aliyah, to make Israel his home, and to give himself to its defense. When he sought to enlist in the IDF, he was initially turned away, but his persistence and his refusal to be denied the chance to stand with his people ultimately won him entry. He made the ultimate sacrifice to the state of Israel, and standing before his grave, now a shrine to all those that come to visit, and especially those fortunate enough to join Birthright, we felt the intimate ache and the loss and the incandescent pride of a life given in devotion. Michael's name is more than a name. It is a living echo of the commitment and the cost of freedom. In his memory, his parents founded the Michael Levin Lone Soldier Center, a loving, practical outpouring of support for brave young men and women who, like Michael, come from all around the world to join the struggle to protect our homeland. That center is a refuge, meals, guidance, warmth, and community for lone soldiers who leave their families far away to defend a homeland that they have chosen. It is an emblem of how individual sacrifice can become collective care and how grief can be transformed into sustaining action for the next generation. This visit also carried personal resonance for us as we recalled our son Justin's experience just a few short years ago. While on his gap year program, he visited Har Herzl on Yom Hazikaron, like we stand here today, and was struck by the truth that moved him to the core. Most of those buried here were his age or even younger. Confronted with the scale of sacrifice, Justin wrestled with his own Jewish identity and tangled reality of Israeli politics. Yet standing among those graves, he, like us, saw young lives that had chosen action over resignation, soldiers and pioneers who did everything they could to defend this country. He understood their courage and the responsibility to remember, support, and learn from it. With Shabbat approaching, as we stood there with our VBS family on Har Herzl, the weather chilled us to the bone. We found refuge in a cave, an ancient place of echo and shelter, as the skies broke open in a torrent. Rain hammered down on the earth like a mourning drum, and the heavens cried angry tears, and thunder spoke in raw, unravished language, reminding us that grief and grace can arrive together. In that charged elemental space, we said Mourner's Kaddish. The words rose not only from our lips, but from the deepest place of our being. Each Yikadal V'Kadash, a tether to memory, to faith, to the continuity of our people. In a moment, we are all going to share in a brief 3-minute video reflecting on our time at Har Herzl. This video is an invitation to witness with us, to mourn with us, and to stand with Israel at a moment when solidarity matters. May the memory we honor, the legacy of Michael Levin, and the reckoning we experience deepen our commitment to one another and to strengthen our resolve to protect dignity and the safety of our people. We ask you all to join us at the conclusion in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish.
This tradition that has emerged here at this grave reflects the uniqueness of this place and the uniqueness of his story, the uniqueness of his soul. If Michael's life and sacrifice allows an entrance point for hundreds of thousands of young Jews, then it means that his life and his memory is a blessing, a living blessing for us all. Every time I come here and I see it, and I see this all around it, I recognize that his memory is a living blessing that lives on each and every time a young person walks up to this grave and makes the decision, I don't want to put a stone here, I want to put a massive boulder. I want to leave my name, I want to leave my key, I want to leave my college hat, I want to leave my birthright hat to show that I was here, that I paid my respect to Michael.
Yikadal V'Kadash Shemei Rabbah Yalma Tivra Tirusei V'Amlik Makusei V'Layekol V'Yamekol V'Layekol Beis Yisrael V'Agala V'Zman Karev V'Yimru Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Ve'olam V'Omel Mayim Yisbarach V'Yishabach V'Yisbahar V'Yisborcham V'Yisnaseh V'Yisabar V'Yisabel V'Yisabal Shmei V'Rishav V'Richu Le'ela Mikol V'Rachasav V'Shirasa V'Shlechasav V'Nechemasa Daviram V'Yalma V'Yimru Amen Yehi Shwama Rabba Mishemaya V'Chaim Aleinu V'Yakol Yisrael V'Yimru Amen Oseh Shalom V'Ma U'Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Yakol Yisrael V'Yimru Amen.
From the book of Psalms. Tiku v'chodesh shofar, bakese leyom chagenu. Blow the shofar on the new moon to mark the appointed time of the day of our celebration. On a day like today, I'm thinking a lot about time and how we mark time, especially 78 years. And when I think about time in my family, I had two grandfathers, they were both called Saba, grandfather. And one of my Sabas, this is how he dealt with time. When he would go to the airport, he would arrive, even if it was a domestic flight, 3-4 hours early, get to the gate, have a drink, have some food, relax. And then my other Saba would figure out what time was boarding. He'd get to the airport and he'd walk onto the plane. And I really thought, how are they living in the same world? How are they living in the same family, but on totally different clocks? The truth is, as individuals, we all experience time differently. But as people, as a people, we can't afford to. We need to have moments that mark time, that put us all on the same page, and our tradition especially tells us we need rituals and ritual objects that say, this is the time. And that's what the shofar does for us. A few moments ago, as our Shinshin introduced us to that moment of silence that was where we were silent, but there was the sound of the siren, and they experienced that on Yom Hazikaron in Israel. We have the most ancient of sirens, the shofar. And it cuts through everything, and it tells us to stop, and it tells time to stop. And it tells us to pay attention. Shortly, as a community, we will hear Ben Pakdaman blow the shofar. Ben is a longtime member of our community who blows shofar with his children and brother at our Sephardic High Holiday services. So I want to invite Ben to come on up, and I want to invite all of us to take in the sounds of the shofar blasts as we mark this transition from the sorrow and grief of Yom Hazikaron, as we've been reflecting on the beautiful and meaningful lives that had to be lost to make our dream of Israel a reality. And as we listen to the blasts of the shofar, let's let the blasts of the shofar wake us up into the celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut. Let's let it wake us up into gratitude, wake us up into marking the 78 miraculous years of the modern state of Israel. So Ben, please come on up, and I'd like to ask us all to rise for the sounding of the shofar.
Thank you so much to Ben Paktaman. That was 78 for 78 years of Israel's birthday, 78 blasts, and one for good luck, 79. We invite our youth choir to usher in the joy of Yom HaAtzmaut with Bashana Haba'a, and we invite you for the next few songs, please, to join us in joy as we sing along with these beloved songs of Israel.
בשנה הבאה נשנה המרפסת ונספור ציפורים נודדות. ילדים בחופשה ושחקות תופסת בין הבית לבין השדות. עוד תראה אוויר צלול כיין וריח אורני ניסר ברוח הבלעים עם כל פרומונים ובטל דמעת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בצד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור עלו לראות שירייך הנבינות ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור חזרנו אל בורות המים, לשוק ולכיכר, שופר קורא בהר הבית, בעיר העתיקה, ובמרות אשר בסלע, אלפי שמשות צורחות, ושוב נרד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושלום, אדמת סיני
Please rise for Avinu Shebashamayim, prayer for the state of Israel.
Avinu Shebashamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Rishit tzmichat geulatenu, Hagen, Hagen עליה, בעברת, בעברת חסדך, ופרוס עליה, עליה, סוכת, סוכת שלומך, ושלח אורך במדחר, לראשיה, שריך ויועציה, ותקנם, ותקנם בעצה טובה, בעצה טובה מלפניך. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל גואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל, ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו, ונאמר אמן, ונאמר אמן.
You may be seated.
In December of 2023, only 9 weeks or so after October 7th, our daughter Lauren and I were fortunate enough to join Rabbi Leibovitz's first volunteer mission to Israel, one of the most meaningful weeks of my life. While we did get to visit one of the kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope on that trip, we were not on the mission that began the relationship with Kibbutz Ruchama. Luckily, Jeff and I were in Israel last summer, and the Leibovitz family invited us to join them on their visit to the kibbutz.
Ruchama epitomizes the Israeli spirit, They were fortunate enough to avoid the massacres of October 7th. In the aftermath, they welcomed all of the surviving residents of Kfar Aza, a larger community than their own, which suffered a great deal on October 7, to live with them in Ruchama until they could return home. Ruchama found a way to quickly build temporary homes and bring their traumatized neighbors back to their region.
VBS decided that we needed to do something to help this special community of Ruchama. So we partnered with the kibbutz to build a skate and bike park that would be open to all the residents in the area. A safe place where kids could be kids in a time that their childhoods had been taken from them. On our visit, we met several residents. We enjoyed an amazing lunch and received a tour of the renovated senior center and the skate and bike park just months before the ribbon cutting ceremony. Everyone we met showed so much gratitude to VBS, to our community, for the outpouring of support that we had given them. Before we left, we discussed ways to continue the relationship by putting our families in touch with theirs to become pen pals. Our sixth grade planned their visit with their sixth graders this year, but the war postponed the day school Grinberg passport to Israel trip.
Karen and I are so proud to be a part of the Valley Beth Shalom community, a place that is continually finding ways to make a difference and support our brothers and sisters in Israel. Now here is a video message from some of our friends in Kibbutz Ruchama.
Hello to all the members of VBS. We wish you a Chag Atzmaut Sameach.
Hello, VBS. This has been a very difficult time for us lately. And for the last 4 years, we have been in a situation that was not anything we could have imagined. But with your help, we have proceeded with many things that were very beautiful. We hope to see you here soon.
Thank you from Kibbutz Ruchama.
Chag Atzmaut Sameach לקהילת VBS מרוחמה.
Long before I ever visited Israel, I encountered the concept of planting trees there. In Solomon Schechter Day School in the 1980s in Chicago, in anticipation of Tu B'Shvat, there were healthy classroom competitions about who could raise the most money to plant trees. Wow, I thought, Israel must need so many trees. As a child, my expectation of Israel as a desert wilderness, landscape completely devoid of a single tree. Why else would we be encouraged to continue to plant there? When I finally arrived at 12 years old, much to my surprise, I stood in awe of the forests surrounding Jerusalem and the vast groves all throughout the north of Israel. Israel is one of the few places in the world with more trees today than a century ago. As Zionists, we take great pride in our trees. Yet as I've grown up, I've realized that I'm less proud of the trees themselves than I am that Israel exemplifies our Jewish will to be planters. In 1905, a young rabbi was invited from Bausko, Latvia, to journey to pre-state Israel and fill a position as the chief rabbi of Jaffa. That rabbi immediately accepted and ultimately became the pre-state Ashkenazi chief rabbi in 1921. His name was Rav Abraham Isaac HaKohen Kook. And I believe that Rav Kook changed the trajectory of how Jews around the world viewed the Holy Land and interacted with Israel. Rav Kook didn't see the lifestyle of modern secular Zionists as standing at odds with the traditional commandments of our sacred texts. Rather, he saw the Zionist ideals sweeping the entirety of the Jewish world as a step toward the fulfillment of our people's collective destiny. One such mitzvah that resonated with him and that he held up for others was the act of planting trees in the land of Israel. There are articles online about witnesses who saw him dig with his own hands into this holy soil and shed tears of joy while planting a small sapling. The Torah commands us to plant in Israel. When you come into the land, you shall plant all types of trees that bear food, says Leviticus. In a teaching by Rav Kook in his work Orat Tshuva, The Lights of Repentance, he focuses in on biblical description of the third day of creation and notices a discrepancy between the narrative and the world in which we live. In Genesis 1, God states that there be etz pri oseh prilimino, fruit trees that bear its kind of fruit. The rabbis imagine that the term etz pri means a tree that bears the same quality as its fruit. And they notice that we don't have fruit trees that feel and taste like the fruit themselves. I'm not an expert. I've never personally tasted the bark of an apple tree, but I'm pretty confident that the bark doesn't taste or feel like the apple. Rashi explains that this reality is a result, says Genesis Rabbah, of the idea that the creation of the world, in that creation, the fruit tree was exactly like the Torah describes. The fruit were supposed to maintain the same taste, but the world was rendered imperfect after we left the garden. Trees are no longer the same. Rav Kook teaches that whereas during creation the entirety of everything was one complete unit, today we have to view the commandments figuratively. Fruit should be viewed as the goal, the taste of the fruit as the inspiration, the tree itself as the means of achieving that goal. Meaning to say, Rav Kook believed that the commandment to plant actually applies to more than just planting trees. It means that we ought to plant new ideas. We must innovate new means of achieving our goals in the world. We must meet our challenges through the seeds of thought and the development of new means. One has to be a planner and a planter in order to expect fruit to be produced, especially in a new Jewish state, even when it's 78 years young. It's for this reason that I'd like to focus on the image of Rav Kook, digging with his own hands in the holy soil of Israel. Creating and recreating the state of Israel is not a spectator sport. Sometimes you have to literally roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty in the soil. And sometimes you have to figuratively roll up your sleeves and develop new ideas, new agencies, new processes to strengthen and protect and provide for the state and her citizens. For those of us who have spent time in Israel since October 7th, 2023, it might feel difficult to plan and to plant. After more than 2 years of war, with the same demographic of Israelis being called upon to serve again and again and again, and their families forced to live in limbo for long durations, with so many returning that require therapy, with so many families irreparably broken, with so many apartment buildings and homes in the periphery still in ruin, it is a challenge to fulfill the mitzvah and begin dreaming anew, planting anew, building anew. But that is precisely what the Torah commands us as Jews. Zionism has always demanded that we fulfill the mitzvah and plan our way out of disaster. In 1921, Arabs rioted in Jaffa, killing 47 Jews and injuring almost 150. Following the violence, thousands of Jews fled the city of Jaffa to a fledgling nearby village and began to build. Today, that fledgling village on the seashore is the modern, vibrant city of Tel Aviv. In 1929, Arabs rioted in Hebron and murdered almost 70 Jewish people on the first day. Those deadly riots spurred other riots throughout pre-state Israel, which saw the murder of dozens of other Jews in the days to follow. In response, the Jews living there decided to organize and bolster a new organization, and they called it the Haganah. We built after 1948 and we built after 1967, and we built after 1973, and we innovated throughout the intifadas and throughout the years of missiles. After Israel's disengagement from Gaza in 2005, the abduction and captivity of Gilad Shalit in 2006, Hamas took control of Gaza through an election in 2007, Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and 9. That's when Dan Senor and Paul Singer decided to write and release their book about Israel, Startup Nation. In 2009, they cast Israel in a completely new light. In 2023, Hamas militants murdered more than 378 Jews and others attending the Nova Music Festival. Hamas and their other Palestinian collaborators stole 44 human beings from that site. In 2024, KKL, JNF, partnered with bereaved families to plant a tree in memory of every victim in that exact blood-soaked sacred soil. Today, there is a grove of trees growing adjacent to the Nova Music Festival site. These moments in our people's history act as a national alarm, a shofar blast, awakening us to a national need that requires attention. It is human to grieve. It is Jewish to plant. It is Zionistic to spring into action. That's why organizations in Israel and outside of Israel must reassess their own missions to support Israel and the Jewish people and ask themselves if we're helping the way we should. If we're falling short, how do we change? Following October 7th, VBS began to reassess. We sprung into action. The synagogue's 4 volunteer missions since October 7th and our Israel Relationship Committee and Fund stand as a new tree. The fruit of our tree is our relationship with Kibbutz Ruchama, the Yalom Foundation, the Michael Levin Lone Soldier Center, Leket, the Israel Guide Dogs, and Yamin Ord. Our support for those organizations yields relationships for VBS community members, younger and older, as a guest visitor or as a friend in relationship. We're seeking to support organizations that offer people-to-people relationships with us, and the flourishing of those relationships is the rewarding taste. We are not the only ones to reconsider the means of our support for Israel following October 7th. Our speaker tonight, our honoree, Andrew Keen, is the founder of ESSEC, a social business based in Tel Aviv, connecting people around the world with the unique products and remarkable stories of Israeli small businesses. He worked for the Biden administration and made Aliyah to Israel following the massacre of October 7th. In addition, Andrew is now also a member of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency for Israel, part of the leadership cabinet of the American Zionist Movement, and the vice chair of the Memorial Scrolls Trust. I am proud that VBS was one of the first organizations to step forward and support ESSEC and its holy work. ESSEC provides a marketplace, just like the one that you saw out in our hall, in which the fruit that we buy taste like the tree from which it was planted. Every person who buys a product of Israel can literally imagine the small business owner, the artist, the artisan, shaking your hand, offering gratitude. We are helping the Jewish people. V'chi tavo el haaretz natatem. When we come to the land, we should plant. We must continue planting in Israel. I'm proud to welcome one of the great planters of the last 2 years. On behalf of Valley Beth Shalom, it's an absolute honor and joy to welcome my friend, Andrew Keen.
Good evening. I would be remiss not to say, or to start with, the fact that for the last 7 years I've had the privilege of serving on the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency, 5 of those as vice chair of the committee that oversees the Shlichut program, which sends over 2,000 Shlichim to summer camps, campuses, communities, synagogues, and youth movements. And to echo what Rabbi Nolan said earlier, you are quite lucky to have Rotem in your community. And for Rotem, wherever he is, really thank you, because it is not easy to be away from home in a normal year, let alone this one, and especially on this evening. There are few transitions in Jewish or civic life as emotionally disorienting and as deeply Israeli as this one. One moment the country stands still in grief and memory. The next, it is called to celebrate the miracle of Jewish sovereignty, of Jewish agency, lowercase a, and the improbable, hard-won existence of the state of Israel. Only in Israel could two holidays separated by a single evening ask so much of us, and perhaps only in Israel could that contradiction make such profound sense. I want to begin tonight with the memory of one person who, for me, embodies so much of what this evening asks of us. And I'll switch to the slides. There we go. For me, that is Ophir Libstein. I knew Ophir through Jewish lay leadership work. He was the head of the Shara Negev Regional Council, the collection of communities situated along the Gaza border. And he was one of those people whose presence left an impression immediately. He was warm, serious, thoughtful, deeply grounded, deeply visionary, all at once. Several months before October 7th, I sat in Ophir's home in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and I remember that visit vividly. I remember sitting in his kitchen as he spoke passionately about his vision for the region, for the South, for development, for coexistence, for building a life on the border that was not defined only by threat, but by possibility. He spoke of the beauty of the area and about the Darom Adom festival, the festival he created when the red kalaniot, the red flowers, bloom across the south of the country. He spoke about those communities not as symbols, not as abstractions, but as living places full of people trying to build meaningful lives. And I remember one line in particular. He said that living there in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, just a few kilometers from the Gaza border, was 90% heaven and 10% hell. A line I've now come to learn he told many people. But that line stayed with me. It stayed with me because it captured something so essentially Israeli, a refusal to flatten reality into either romanticism or despair. It was not naive, it was honest. It acknowledged the danger, but it refused to surrender to it, as close as it may have been. He insisted that life near the border was not just a story of fear, it was also a story of community, of agriculture, of idealism, of children and neighbors, and above all, of hope. Then came October 7th. That morning, I was on a train from Kiev to Warsaw. When I got to Warsaw, my plan was to get on a plane to finish my Aliyah process. But somewhere near the border between Ukraine and Poland, around the time that the horrors of that day began to unfold, notifications started coming in. One of the first things I received on my phone was from Ynet, an Israeli news source. Ophir Libstein had been killed in Kibbutz Kfar Aza. He had gone out as a member of the Kitat Konenut, the rapid response team, when he heard that there had been an infiltration in the kibbutz. Can you imagine your mayor doing this if this happened? He left his home to defend his community, and he was killed at point-blank range just outside the same home where I had sat with him only a few months before. That fact has never left me. Not just that he was killed, but where? That the same home in which he had spoken of beauty and development and coexistence stood just steps from where he died, defending his community from terror. That the place where he had spoken of the future became part of the horror of that day. And on this Yom Hazikaron, he comes to mind immediately for me, not because of how he died, but because of how he lived. Not only because of what was taken, but what he stood for. Tonight, as we remember Israel's fallen, I remember Ophir. And I remember, above all, the moral and emotional challenge that this night places before us. Because only in Israel do we move directly from remembrance to joyful celebration. Only in Israel do we go from the siren and the cemetery to the barbecue and song. Only in Israel do we ask our human soul to pivot so quickly and so truthfully between mourning and gratitude. And for those of us who have lived in Israel over the past 2 years, or who have visited Israel, or whose families live there, it has often felt as though we're living in this gap between these two holidays for far longer than just one evening. Week after week, month after month, we have found ourselves caught between commemoration and celebration, between trauma and perseverance, between heartbreak and stubborn hope. At times, it has felt like a glitch in a movie or Wi-Fi that just will not load, as though the story keeps going back and forth between loss and recovery, emergency and routine, a fragile sense that maybe we are moving forward, and then the realization that we are being pulled in, back in again by another crisis, another grief, and another aftershock. And yet, only in Israel, life continues. Not because that pain is gone, not because the grief has been resolved, but because Israelis continue doing what they have always had to do, carrying memory with one hand and building the future with the other. We often hear that Israelis have a unique sense of resilience. It's like a buzzword. And that is true, to a point. But I sometimes worry that when we talk about resilience and Israeli resilience, we talk about it as though it's automatic, as though Israelis are born with some genetic predisposition for resilience, or as if Israelis take extra resilience in their coffee each morning. But resilience is what happens in the moment of deep challenge, deep pain, deep disruption, when people still choose somehow to keep showing up. It is forged in the space between fear and duty, between heartbreak and responsibility, between what has been lost and what still must be built and could be built. That understanding of resilience sits at the heart of the work we try to do with ESSEC. Our team often talks about resilience as a math equation. Resilience is where tradition and innovation meet. We see that literally in the products made by Israeli small businesses and artists. We work with people making things that in one form or another, our people have been making for generations, and in some cases, millennia. Ceramics, Judaica, textiles, products from olive wood, soap, food product, ritual objects, art for your home, things for the table, and things for the soul. And yet, in a uniquely Israeli way, those products are constantly being reinterpreted and reimagined through new materials, new methods, new technologies, new stories, and new visual languages. And for those of you here who are regular Israel travelers, these are the things that we love to bring home with us. And based on the last hour, I think you might know what I'm talking about. But we also see this tradition and innovation meeting on a much more personal level. Tradition is not only what we make, it is what we know. It is what gives shape to family life, community life, and daily life. And then innovation arrives, often not as a choice, but as a force thrust upon people by circumstance. A family from the north or the south is displaced, a parent is called up for reserve duty, a workshop loses its tourism traffic, a business owner is trying to pack orders from their temporary housing, and the list continues. This is not innovation in the startup nation sense of the word. This is innovation as adaptation, as innovation, and sometimes as survival. And we have seen over and over and over again that when Israelis meet these conditions, they do so not with any less sadness than anyone else, but with truly extraordinary creativity. I saw this in a deeply personal way when I returned to Kibbutz Kfar Aza just a few months after the war began. The kibbutz was still under the IDF control. Zaka volunteers were still sifting through the remains of the charred homes. And I remember seeing Ophir Libstein's election banners still hanging there because municipal elections were supposed to happen in the fall of that year. And I remember the feeling of that place, frozen in time, frozen in destruction, and yet somehow emptied of the people who gave it life. And I remember thinking that whatever ESSEC would become, whatever we would do, we had to do something to support Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Not because commerce could heal what had happened there, it could not, but because solidarity needed to be tangible. So one of the first things we did nearly a full year after that visit, was a project to provide Hanukkah care packages for the veteran members of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, the Vatikim, whose children and grandchildren had at that point been relocated mostly to the center and had not returned. And these boxes were filled with products from small businesses that needed the income from their kibbutz, from kibbutzim that surrounded them. And we invited communities and organizations around the world to put their own fingerprint on that effort. And the first community to step forward in a truly meaningful way was Valley Beth Shalom. Not only to support it, but to really support it. And so I want to echo what Rabbi Nolan started with and really to thank you for that. Thank you to this community and those in this room who saw an opportunity to make a difference in a humble, practical, and very human way. And I think the photos you see are the same moedon of the kibbutz that you saw in the video message from before, from Ruchama. And with 2 years of hindsight, I can say partnerships with communities like VBS have been both a strategy and an outcome for the work that we're trying to do. And I find it inspiring the connection this community has built with Kibbutz Kfar Aza and now with, by extension, Kibbutz Ruchama. A few months after that, a bereaved father from the kibbutz reached out to us, a secular Israeli, completely secular Israeli, and for some reason, he felt a calling to ensure that each of the new homes built in the new neighborhood of Kibbutz Ruchama for the residents of Kfar Aza that were now living there had a kosher mezuzah that was dedicated in honor of his late son. And so we sprung into action again, combining philanthropy and commerce to both support Israeli businesses and to support these families. So when you visit Kibbutz Ruchama next, on your next synagogue mission, the mezuzot you see on their doorposts are from the small businesses that we work with. Over the last 2 years, ESSEC has grown into something larger than I could have imagined at the beginning. We have now worked with hundreds of Israeli small businesses, shipped their products to 40 countries, helped generate millions in shekels in value for small businesses in our first 2 years, and shared hundreds of stories and videos that have reached millions of people around the world, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. We have partnered with more than 100 organizations and communities. We've hosted well over 200 pop-ups and marketplaces in synagogues, JCCs, conferences, and public venues on every continent except Antarctica, but I assure you we are working on it, and tried to create not only transactions, but relationships between people abroad and the Israelis behind these products. And importantly, we have focused on businesses that are often left out of international opportunity. Family-owned businesses, reservist-owned businesses, businesses from the north and the south, Haredi women, Nova survivors, businesses impacted by displacement, new graduates of Israel's design schools, and businesses founded by people trying to rebuild after profound disruption. Because after all, Israel, if nothing else, is a country of small businesses. This is a country of roughly 10 million people, and yet it has more than 600,000 small businesses. That means small business is not niche in Israel. And when we talk about Israel as high-tech nation, we talk about Israel as high-tech nation, but it's really low-tech which keeps the economy on its feet. It is woven into the fabric of society. It employs 3/4 of the country's people. And at nearly every Shabbat table, someone is talking about a small business. The one they own, the one they work for, the one a sibling started, the one a cousin is trying to keep afloat, the one that employs a neighbor, the one strained by reserve duty, displacement, or the collapse of tourism. These businesses are often family businesses, they're often sole proprietorships, they're often rooted in the country's geographic and social periphery, and because of that, they are also incredibly vulnerable. They are often short of working capital, they're deemed risky by the banks, and yet they are the ones that local communities look to for stability, for employment, and for local pride. Since the war began, these 3 pressures have shown up over and over again: the collapse of tourism, displacement from the north and the south, and repeated reserve duty. They are often the difference between being able to make payroll or not, between keeping the studio open or not, and between continuing to create or having to stop. And what ESSEC has tried to do is respond to these situations, these pressures, in the best way we can, by connecting people not only to Israeli products, but to Israeli stories. Because many of us from abroad see Israel through the headlines, through the holy sites, the milestones, and the crises. We don't hear enough about the stories of everyday, yet remarkable Israelis. The ceramicist in the Galilee, the food producer in the south, the jewelry maker in Haifa, the soap maker in the north, the artist rebuilding after displacement, the family business trying to hold on while a spouse is away on reserve duty. And we wanted to create a way for communities around the world to connect with modern Israel, not only through politics or conflict, but through the profoundly human language of story, work, beauty, and livelihood. So picking just one of these as an example to share with you is not easy, but I want to give you a sense of what this looks like in their own words. If we can switch to the video.
אז אני אורי, בת 26 מהרצליה, צורפת, מעצבת תכשיטים ובעלת העסק ג'ולורי. השרשרת הזאת היא מתוך הקולקציה של עדי, לקולקציה קוראים קולקציית עדי. רציתי שבאמת תמיד תהיה תזכורת פיזית שהיא כאן איתנו, וגם רציתי שתהיה לזה משמעות שהיא קצת רחבה יותר, ושאני אוכל לחבר את הארץ, את העולם, גם בסיפור של עדי, וגם במהות שהיא גם גדולה יותר, ובסופו של דבר, שוב, לא משנה מה יבוא עלינו בדרך, אנחנו נמצאים בתקופה מאוד מאוד מורכבת, ובמיוחד מה-7 באוקטובר. זה באמת תזכורת שעם ישראל חי, לא משנה מה, ועם עדי, הסיפור של עדי, יהיה הפלטפורמה לספר את הדבר הזה, ושזה יגיע לעוד מקומות בעולם, ושדרך הדבר הזה גם יבינו בסופו של דבר מה קרה לנו כעם. אני מבחינתי עשיתי את שלי, וזה באמת, שוב, הסיפור הפרטי של עדי ושל כל עם ישראל מבחינתי.
את יכולה לשתף אותנו במה שעברת ב7 באוקטובר?
עדי, בדולת שלי, נסעה לפסטיבל הנובה, כמו להמון מסיבות אחרות שהיא הייתה הולכת אז. בבוקר שהתחילו הטילים והאזעקות והכל התחיל לקרות, אז מהר מאוד הבנו שעדי הייתה במסיבה הזאת. בהתחלה לא קישרנו את זה אפילו ישר, כי זה באמת לא משהו שהוא יוצא דופן שהיא נוסעת לכל מיני מסיבות טבע כאלה ואחרות. היא הגיעה למיגונית בבארי, ושם בעצם הגיעו מחבלים, וההמשך ידוע, וזה השפיע מאוד. גם עליי כאינדיבידואל, גם על המשפחה כולה. אז אני חושבת שזה היה איזשהו שוק שאי אפשר להתכונן אליו, ורציתי למצוא איזושהי דרך יצירתית, בדרך שלי, שבסוף זה מה שאני עושה בחיים. אני מעצבת ואני יוצרת, וזה מה שאני הכי אוהבת לעשות, אבל בסופו של דבר, עד לאוקטובר זה היה נטו ממקום של יצירה ובאמת אהבה לתכשיטים ולאופנה, ופתאום זיהיתי איזשהו פוטנציאל, שיש לי איזשהו משהו בידיים, איזשהו כלי שאני יכולה להנגיש את זה לקהל שהוא רחב, את הקולקציה של עדי, וגם ליצור משהו שהוא פיזי, שילווה אנשים לאורך הדרך, ובתוך כל זה גם יצרנו דרך אגב את הגלויות עם הסיפור של עדי, שכל מי באמת ירכוש את השרשרת שלה, אז ישמע לסיפור שלה יותר. כמובן שאצלי זה יהיה בלב לנצח, אבל אם אני רוצה להפיץ את זה יותר הלאה לכל מיני אנשים, ובארץ ובעולם, אז אני האמנתי שזאת הדרך הכי טובה שאני יכולה לעשות אותה. אז כל הקולקציה הזאת היא בעצם, המוטיב שלה זה כל הדברים שבאינטואיציה היו קשורים אליה, בין אם זה שרשרת של דג, שזה המזל שלה, הגילי שמש ושרשרת שמש, כי היא הייתה שמש מבחינתי ומבחינת כולנו. המגן דוד ספציפית זה איזשהו תכשיט שבתוך הקולקציה הזאת שמהווה כל הזמן תזכורת לזה שלא משנה מה, אז הרוח שלנו לא תיכבה.
So this is a glimpse into the world, the modern Israel that we see every day. And we have done this while navigating, as I'm sure some of you have as well, travel disruptions, logistics disruptions, tariffs, airspace closures, exchange rate challenges, inflation, and all the complications of doing business in a country under extraordinary strain. And the logistics for sure keep us up at night, but the people we get to work with are what gets us up very early. Small businesses in Israel are not only economic engines, they are social anchors. They are family stories, they are acts of perseverance. They are one of the ways communities hold together. And when a small business survives, something much larger survives with it. A family survives with greater dignity, a neighbor holds on to continuity, a region retains some of its social fabric, a person keeps faith with their own capacity to create. A community remains a place where life can still be built. And on a night like tonight, I think of the promise in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And it says that pioneers and defenders, they made the desert bloom, revived the Hebrew language, built villages and towns, and created thriving community, controlling its own economy and culture, loving peace but knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all the country's inhabitants, and aspiring towards independent nationhood. That promise is not only about government, it's about the kind of society we are trying to build, a society which memory leads to responsibility, a society in which grief does not have the final word, a society in which even after devastation, people still make, still build, still dream, and still create. And Israeli small businesses are in many ways, and in their own way, fulfilling the intentions set forth a generation ago by the country's framers. And so when I think of Ophir Libstein, we can go back to the pictures, I think not only of the violence that took his life, but of the vision that animated his life. He looked at the Gaza border and saw not only danger, but possibility. Not only the 10% hell, but the 90% heaven. Not only what had to be defended, but what was worth building. And that vision matters incredibly. And in some small way, I believe supporting Israeli small businesses helps carry that vision forward. Because when you support an Israeli small business, you are not only buying a thing, you're helping sustain a person, a family, a place, a story, a sense of dignity, and a measure of hope. So tonight, as we move from remembrance to joyful celebration, I want to leave you with this. Supporting Israeli small businesses is not secondary to the story of Israel. It is part of the story of Israel. Israeli small business owners are inheritors and guarantors of the legacy set forth by their parents and grandparents, and our obligation to them as Jews abroad is far more expansive than the kikal pushki that my grandparents had on the Shabbat table to plant all those trees that we heard about. Supporting Israeli small businesses is one of the ways that we help families remain rooted. It is one of the ways we strengthen communities in the North and the South. It's one of the ways we honor creativity in the face of disruption. It is one of the ways Jews and friends of Israel around the world can participate in the ongoing rebuilding of Israeli life. And for those of us who love Israel, there is always a temptation to ask, what grand thing can we do? But not every act of support needs to be grand in scale. And in fact, the ones that seem small, when multiplied across communities, across continents, across generations, become solidarity. And solidarity, lived consistently and concretely, becomes the strength that is needed today in Israel more than ever. And as we enter Yom HaAtzmaut, may we do more than celebrate Israel. May we help build an Israel worthy of celebration, an Israel of courage, of dignity, of creativity, and of hope. So I wish you Atzmaut Sameach, happy Independence Day.
Please join the youth choir and me as we sing Oseh Shalom, our prayer for peace.
Israel.
clergy and staff who are involved in the program tonight. I want to thank the musicians, Daniel and Daniel. Thank you for always being with us. You feel like family. I want to thank our president, Eric Kingsley, volunteer mission number 4. I want to thank Mitch and Karen, volunteer mission number 4. Jeff and Karen, volunteer mission number 1. Thank you for all being part of the program this evening. I want to thank people we can't see in this room, Steve Perlman and Jared Lindy, who are back in the booth. I want to thank Aiden Bostic, who's always in the room with us, making us sound great. And most of all, we're going to have plenty of time for me to say this over and over again. The first time Andrew and I met face to face was in Palo Alto at a Z3 conference that I attend every year. I shook his hand and I said, Nolan Leibovitz from VBS. He pointed at me and said, Alana Zimmerman. And I said, yes, Alana Zimmerman. And so many people around the country point at me and say, Alana Zimmerman, because Alana does so much work on our behalf, reaching out to people, making connections, building bridges. She takes often the direction and the marching orders and everything that we dream up on the second floor and turns it into action. We're going to miss her a great deal. If we haven't thanked her enough over the last 26 years, Alana Zimmerman, thank you very much for everything that you do. And now we're going to sing a couple of more songs. And while we sing those songs, you might see Andrew and a few people slip out of the sanctuary. Andrew will be standing at the marketplace, which will be reopened for those of us who didn't get a chance to buy something and support it beforehand. And if you're a couple of volunteers that can help after the program, please stick around and help. We encourage you to schmooze with Andrew. More importantly, we encourage you to support ESSEC and the small businesses across the state of Israel. Thank you for being here tonight. Chag Ha'atzmaut Sameach. Please rise for Hatikva.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות, כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. Everybody. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תיפול כעת רוחנו מסביב ברזל של חרבות והנה תפרוס כנפיים התקווה בת שנות 2000 עוד נצא לשיר ברחובות כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד אפילו כשקשה לראות כולם ביחד אף אחד פה לא בודד שישרפו במלחמות